Pacific Rim is the latest film by Guillermo Del Toro. Now, this is the guy who brought us the two Hellboy movies, Blade 2, Pan's Labyrinth, Kronos, The Devil's Backbone. He's a filmmaker that I have a lot of admiration for and whose films I really like. Now, Pacific Rim follows, as I'm sure you're probably already aware, the plot of giant robots fighting giant monsters. Now, the film itself was one where I went in not really knowing what to expect, because Guillermo Del Toro's movies are never as simple as they first appear. So, I thought, I'm sure that Pacific Rim's going to be full of surprises. So, let's get the plot out of the way first. Now, the film is essentially a love letter to B-movies and Japanese cinema of years gone by. So the plot isn't the most complex in the world. Essentially, it follows a war which has erupted after a interdimensional rift has appeared at the bottom of the ocean, and monsters called kaijus start to appear from this rift and terrorise cities. Now, in response, the human race build giant robots called Jaegers, which I believe is a German word for hunter, to fight the monsters, and that's essentially the plot. Now, what I did notice actually in this movie was that a lot of the money shots from the trailer, not all of them, but most of them, were actually in the first 5 minutes of the movie. The movie itself starts with a sort of a 5-10 minute montage or exposition dump, telling us all about how the war started, what Jaegers are, what kaijus are. And it really gets a lot of the exposition out of the way so that it can then, focus on the characters that it's introducing us to and the sort of plot of the actual movie itself. So I did quite like that. I thought it was really well done. I thought the montage was well done, and it treated us to a couple of sort of destructive action scenes very early on in the film, and it gave us a hint of sort of what to expect. And I thought that was a pretty good move by the filmmakers in, getting all the sort of clunky exposition out of the way in the first 5 minutes. So our hero is played by Charlie Hunnam from, I believe he's in Sons of Anarchy. He is a pilot of a Jaeger who lost his brother to one of the kaijus during a mission. Now, the Jaegers themselves, the robots are so massive, they're like skyscraper tall, they're so big that it actually requires 2 people to pilot them, because they basically establish in that first 5 minutes that, no one person can pilot a Jaeger on their own, it requires 2. When the robot's being piloted by 2 people, they have to connect their minds in what's called the bridge. And the pilots have to be sort of emotionally sort of maybe bonded or relatable so that they can connect and work this robot together. And that's very much one of the themes of the movie, is that, you have to work together to overcome adversity. That's something that they sort of established very early on, in that since the appearance of the kaijus, every country has sort of dropped everything and we're all working together to build these massive robots. So that was a theme I really liked. You've also got supporting characters played by people like Idris Elba. I believe it's pronounced Idris Elba. The guy from Luther, he's in The Losers. He's even in Thor. Idris Elba I really do like, and I like him in this movie. He's playing essentially the leader of the mission, a military general who has absolutely sort of zero tolerance for nonsense. You have a couple of scientist characters who I know tend to be people's biggest complaint with the movie, but I actually quite like both of them. When they came on screen, I'll admit, I thought, oh god, are these guys going to be sort of the misplaced comic relief? But I actually grew to sort of like them both over the course of the film. And the reason being is that the characters themselves essentially are comic book stereotypes or comic book archetypes. These are the types of characters that we've seen hundreds of times before in movies like this. But Guillermo Del Toro has the good sense to sort of give them all either enough backstory or to hint at enough backstory for each one to actually make the audience care. So while they are, to a certain extent, stereotypes of the genre, of the sci-fi sort of comic book genre, they are interesting enough to keep the audience invested in what's going on. And this is another point of the movie that I really liked, is that we actually care about the characters, so that when we get into the massive action scenes, and honestly the action in this is huge and unbelievable, we do actually care about the characters involved. So I did really appreciate it from that perspective. The action itself is very sort of... every scene, and believe it or not, you think, how different can a fight between a robot and a monster be? But every scene, every action scene where they fight is slightly different. There's always a new twist on it, whether or not it's two monsters versus one robot, or a monster that can fly, or if it's underwater or in city streets. Every scene is just sort of different enough that you don't get action fatigue like you would perhaps with other movies that have come out this summer. The action is very well shot. There is very little shaky cam. You can actually tell what's happening, which is great, because that's another criticism I have of a lot of recent blockbusters, is that I don't have a clue what's going on because the camera is literally doing this all the time. So that I really liked. The CGI, and obviously a film like this where you have giant monsters fighting giant robots is going to be sort of heavy on the CGI, but the CGI in the fights was amazing, and at times watching it I thought, oh my, is some of this practical? Because it is so good. I would love to know how they actually sort of did the fights between the monsters and the robots, because some of it literally does look real. And I know that Guillermo Del Toro is a real advocate of practical effects over CGI, which is why in the film, when you have the sort of cockpit of the robots, the whole set was actually built and constructed, and it gives the world that it's set in some real sort of weight. You know, you actually believe that it's real, this universe they've created, because all the sets are real. So that was good. You also have, I mean, the sort of breathtaking part of the film is the design. Now, I know that a lot of reviewers have previously mentioned this, but the design of the film is absolutely incredible. Like, it's such a rich and textured film aesthetically. Everything from the sets to the interfaces of the computers to the characters' wardrobes, everything has clearly been given so much love and attention by the crew that you just believe that this world exists. It is beautifully designed, this movie. And another part of the film that I actually, you know, thought was amazing was the score. The score is brilliant. Now, a lot of the sort of Jaegers come from different countries. You know, the whole sort of idea of the film is that the countries are having to, you know, pull together to help each other and stuff. And they managed to weave sort of stereotypical themes into the score for each of the countries. And the score is very much reflective of what's happening on, you know, on screen, of the characters. It has a great theme, which is one that you will actually probably leave the cinema humming. I really love the score in this. So that was great. And as I say, essentially, it's just a refreshing blockbuster. I would most sort of readily compare it to J.J. Abrams' Star Trek movies, in that it's very bright and colourful and it's fun. It doesn't take itself seriously, or doesn't take itself too seriously. It's really well paced. While the characters are sort of archetypes of the genre, we do still care about them. We're given enough to care about to stay invested in the movie. It's very much, it felt to me like a blockbuster that would have come out in the sort of mid-90s. You know, around the same time. It could have easily come out in the same summer as Independence Day. It's got that sort of old-fashioned blockbuster. I say old-fashioned, can you believe that the 90s is old-fashioned now? It's got that sort of old-fashioned blockbuster feel to it. It's very fun, because so many blockbuster movies that have come out recently, you know, have been gritty, and, you know, they all have sort of washed out colour palettes and a shaky camera, and everybody's so brooding and serious. It's really just refreshing. Don't get me wrong, it's not original, because Pacific Rim is not original at all. You know, it takes everything that we've seen in giant robots and giant monster movies before now and puts it in one film. But it's refreshing to get that from a summer blockbuster. So if you are wondering, or rather on the fence about going to see Pacific Rim, I would definitely recommend it. There is enough there to make it the surprise film of the summer so far. It's definitely a film that I would rewatch, and a film that I want to know more about in terms of its design and effects. It was a really good time at the cinema, and I highly recommend Pacific Rim.